Family business makes no sense. So let's talk about it.
Welcome, I'm Jon Kenfield, the Family Business Solutionist, with another episode in the series Family Business Makes No Sense, where we talk about why, if you mix a family with a business, chances are you're going to end up in conflict, because everything that works for a family conflicts with everything that works for a business. Today we're talking about one of the all-time favourite causes of conflict in family business, sibling rivalry. Now, this is often touted as a cause because it's often very visible, and it's certainly one of the common causes of conflict. We see it in a great many family businesses in conflict. But it's certainly not the only reason why a family may be in conflict, and there may be a whole bunch of other underlying reasons sitting there behind it. So what we're going to do today is explore what's going on when there is a sibling conflict, how you unpack it to understand it, how you deal with it, and then how you move on beyond. Now, when anybody thinks about classic causes of conflict in a family business, if you think of any of the Netflix series, any of the tabloid newspapers and so on, there's almost always issues of either sibling conflict or intergenerational old bull, young bull type conflicts going on. Sibling rivalry is not, a bit like narcissism, necessarily a bad thing. We need sibling rivalry as part of our whole developmental process. All of the advanced animals, if you look at how they behave, engage in forms of sibling interplay and competition as a way of learning skills, learning boundaries, learning how to manage social interactions, and typically, particularly when progeny are very young, the sibling is the closest and most available warm body to practice on. So competition is a natural part of growing up. It's part of the play process of learning how to cope, how to manage yourself and interactions with others in the world at large. Now, if the emotional development of a child is, for whatever reason, unfortunately inadequate, either because things are done consciously that are bound to create bad impacts, or they are done negligently, or they're simply unintended consequences, what is very clear is that if things go horribly wrong at an early stage in somebody's development, as a child, probably before the age of 5, certainly before the age of 10, then that can leave the consequences of emotional trauma with an individual for the rest of their lives. And that can actually adversely impact the way they see themselves, the way they interact with the world, the way they perform, the way they work with their siblings, the way they work with other people, the way they hold relationships, well into their later years, perhaps for their entire lives. So this is not something that we take lightly, and we've talked in other episodes about things like parenting practices and the like, and the impact of the environment in which people grow up. So when we're looking at personal development, we're saying it's a necessary part of any human development. But if the family environment promotes excessive competitiveness, if it is either encouraging or accommodating of antisocial behaviours like bullying, if there is a sense of favoritism, if even a new baby is introduced into the house and the coping skills of young siblings are not up to accepting that child as an extension of the family, if it creates jealousies and resentments as a consequence of lost attention by the parents on themselves, even things like that can trigger the beginnings of forms of sibling rivalry, which can then continue to develop as life goes on. Now, what are siblings competing for? It may be for things, toys in the playroom. It may be for parental attention. It may be for dominance, older, younger, bigger, stronger, male, female, all of those things. It doesn't matter what it is. If the competition gets out of control, then it can develop into rivalries, which can stay there for life and can be very, very debilitating. So, if there is a sense that there is a problem with sibling rivalry, and in my book I've got a little questionnaire which talks about some of the ways you can identify sibling rivalry. If there's, say, a resentment about roles and responsibilities and remuneration within the business, if there are arguments about who should be the next leader, all sorts of things of that nature are indicators of forms of sibling rivalry. Now, if they're there at an extreme level, you need to do something about them, because they may then play out in ways that destabilise the business, interfere with decision making, stall succession processes and the like. So the first thing we need to do is work out what is driving this. Let's unpack the personalities of the individuals who are involved to see if we can find some root causes of their unbalanced as opposed to healthy rivalry. Because rivalry can be entirely healthy. It can be a competitive urge that enables people to leverage diversity, or it can be destructive. So we may do psychometric testing, we'll certainly do some interviewing, we'll try to identify who we're working with, what makes them tick, and in particular see if we can work out, are there any goads or traumas in the past that may have created an unhealthy form of rivalry and conflict in the present. Now that means that we need to unpack the family narrative from the perspective of the individuals. We're not worried that much about whether we are dealing with actual verifiable facts. What we do need to know is that we are dealing with what people honestly believe to be the facts to which they are now responding. So frequently with the family, we will go right back into early childhood and we will identify an event that took place in those certainly well preteen years, maybe a lot younger than that, because we often find that when two siblings are having a go at each other all the time, they simply cannot be left alone, even in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, there is often an event that took place in the playroom or a resentment that took place because somebody got the hand-me-down clothes, somebody got the new bicycle, somebody smashed somebody else's toys, somebody poisoned somebody else's goldfish. It can be something which was cataclysmic to a young person, but from the perspective of 30, 40, 50 years later, is a relatively minor thing that can be acknowledged, explained as a piece of foolishness during childhood. Apologies, reparations, acknowledgements can be made. And the extraordinary thing is, and I've confirmed this with psychologists, it doesn't really matter if the event is the real root cause of the years of conflict that have taken place subsequently. If the parties are able to believe it's the root cause and blame it as the root cause, that is enough. And then we go tribal on this, and we pour all of the angst into, ideally, a physical object such as a rubber hatchet, and we can go and bury it in the garden as a way of closing the door on that history. We can do the same thing by acknowledging what took place and offering to make reparations, apologising, acknowledgement, making some gesture to make up for the harm and the hurt that people have felt over the years. That's usually all it takes. And then we're able to say, well, we can't change the past, but we've acknowledged the past. We've accepted the past. We've validated the way that we felt. We've explained why, to any objective external person, we have been acting in incomprehensible ways to each other for so many years, even when there's so much at stake in our families, in our relationships, in our business, in our wealth. And now we're able to say we can put it in a box and we can move on. So we haven't resolved the problem. We've simply got to the point where we can now cope with it, manage it, tuck it away. It no longer troubles us. What we must then do is create new plans for the family and the business from the perspective of being more collaborative and more constructive in the mindsets of the siblings. So we revisit or create new plans for the family and the business. We reconfirm individual roles, responsibilities and accountabilities for achieving those plans. We work out whether it's appropriate for somebody to continue in the roles that they're in the business, or maybe they shouldn't be in the business at all, or they should be in a different role where they can do things properly and they're not there purely as a way of propagating the rivalry with their sibling. We get a better outcome for the family, a better outcome for the business, a more constructive outcome for the individuals, and something that may have been troubling the family for decades can literally be resolved within weeks with a number of meetings and the sort of exposure process that we've talked about, and then a reworking of what the present and therefore the future should look like. If you found this useful and if it resonates, please give us a like. Please let other people know if you think this may be useful for them, and please make other people aware of what we're doing in this series to help everybody make sense of being in a family business. Because when you get it right, the rewards are terrific. When you get it wrong, the consequences can be dire. From me, Jon Kenfield, the Family Business Solutionist in Melbourne, Australia, thank you for watching.